The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
It's good to be on a two-man pod. It is much, much better. I don't like talking to myself, especially in times of mild grief. I don't want to get into that early in the show. I'm Dan Besbris, Neil Rochlani, one of the two true mensches. I'm going Yiddish here at the beginning of the pod. What a mensch. Neil, you and Adrian, I have nothing but thanks for the two of you for doing all that extra work and picking up the slack while I was gone. So I say to you to start this pod, thank you and hello.
Hello. My pleasure, Dan. Thanks for having the confidence in myself and Adrian to step up for you. We really enjoy it. Hoop ball leagues, they're blowing up. I know you've been advertising it. I've been the one on the administrative end trying to get out emails to everyone and Twitter messages. So hopefully I've caught up now with everyone. So we're recording this on Wednesday evening, so it's going to be delayed by the time you hear it. But everyone that's been in the Hoop Ball League up until Wednesday night in the forums or has tweeted at me should have received a link to the league they're interested in.
That was a hard pivot right there. I like that. That was good. You know what? When I think about the way we're handling these Hoop Ball leagues, I feel like we run like a weird nonprofit hole in the wall college, and I'm in charge of recruitment and you're the admissions committee. And that's what's happening right now, where I'm out there like, of course you want to come to this place. And then they show up at the door and they're like, well, what do I do now? And you're like, okay, well, you're going to be in you're going to be in the humanities, you're going to be in sciences. And so how's that going for you so far? Are you hanging in there? I warned you that it was going to be a pretty good undertaking.
Yeah, I mean, when it first came out, the timing wasn't so great for me, right? You sent out that email on Friday morning. I'm like, yeah, I'll help you. Oh, by the way, I'm going to remote rural Wisconsin for the weekend, and I'll have no internet access for the next 2 days. So everyone who's responding right away and wants to get in, they won't hear for a while. But I was able to get caught up Sunday night, and now we got a big wave in tonight too, which is great. And so we've got already over a half dozen leagues open. Some have been filled up already, and yeah, I just want to get people interested. So I'm glad we got some good response.
Well, they are interested. I don't know what the count is right now. As I've said on the last couple of pods, and by the way, this is Fantasy NBA Today, a hoop ball presentation, at Dan Besbris, at Ball with Neil, if you want to follow us on Twitter, and at HoopBallFantasy, if you want to follow the website's Twitter feed, or just go to hoop-ball.com. And click on the forums tab if you want to get involved in these listener leagues. This is what we're talking about, and we got some fantasy stuff to talk as well on this podcast. I know that the last couple of shows have been a little bit more. Well, one of them was exclusively about the listener leagues, and then yesterday I talked quite a bit about gambling after the NBA announced that partnership with MGM Resorts. Today we're going to get back into some fantasy stuff, but first, you know, the listener league thing is a lot of fun. It's listener, reader, it's pro league as well. You know, we have an email out to the entire Hoop Ball staff right now. Neil, I know you've been placing those guys as the requests have come back in, and there hasn't even been a mass email sent out yet. So we are sitting on right now basically the core of these listener and reader leagues, which is you guys right now, the podcast listeners. You heard the announcement this week. The Twitter folks, those that follow me and Hoop Ball and you, Neil, on Twitter, got that announcement first, and Facebook. There is a large contingent of people that maybe just sort of tune out the NBA at this time of year that will be getting an email from the Hoop Ball marketing platform shortly, letting them know that these leagues are open as well. So things are only going to get crazier, and as we approach opening day, you're going to get folks coming out of the woodwork as well. So letting everybody know here listening to the pod, again, if you want to get into one of those leagues, they are all 9-cat right now. Next year, we'll probably expand to more types of leagues. We're just sort of streamlining at present. You got head-to-head and roto. You've got both free and cash leagues. The cash leagues are all $50 buy-in at this point. And if you want to get involved, there's a couple ways to do it. One, tweet at us. Me and Neil, If you tweet our way, you got to follow Neil so he can direct message with you. That's important. He can get you placed that way. And the other one is, as I mentioned before, and as Neil also said, the Hoop Ball forums. They're blowing up, man. We had like 10 to 15 requests just this afternoon in the forums. That's your problem now.
Yeah, thanks. I like to call it a opportunity, but thank you.
Yeah, doing our best on this one. So, I think in just some final thoughts on the listener leagues and how they're shaking out at this point, the last year, the Dynasty League, we definitely found somebody to sort of take control of that early, because that's a lifetime project at this point. The other leagues, it all became a little bit more, because the response was so great, we were kind of ill-prepared for it. I'm willing to admit that. This year, we're more prepared. We're ready to go. They're going to be much more closely monitored. I think most folks had a pretty good time. Fantrax does a pretty cool thing, Neil, and I don't know if you've seen this as you've explored kind of the back end on the management side of these leagues, but you can actually see how often teams log into Fantrax. I didn't know that was the case, and as I was going through it, and sending out reminder emails to everybody that you got to get into a new league this year, most people, I think there were like 2 out of the 120 teams that only logged in on draft night. Pretty much everybody else was in there 2 to 3 times to 7 times to 10 times a week. These are really active leagues, both free and paid. If you want some good competition, come join us in these things. And Neil, I think you won one of the leagues last year, right?
I did.
Attaboy.
I did my first head-to-head league last year, and I got some good players through some good advice from Fantasy NBA Today, and I was able to. I made a couple of good trades, and then guys just ended up doing better than expected. One thing that I do when I that's helpful when I play fantasy sports is, when I have a draft that's right after another draft, the second draft tends to be much easier.
Doesn't it though?
It's like so I drafted in that league the night after I had my home league draft, which ended probably like late afternoon. Then I came home and I had that Hoop Ball League draft, and it was just like everything was in my head. Any nerves that I had before from the prior draft were gone, and it was so much easier. So I'm thinking now maybe I'll do some mock drafts right before all of my real drafts.
Yeah, like the hour and a half beforehand. And by the way, I got to say, I'm listening to every word that you're saying. Neil and I have a video chat going at present. I have to mention to you, Neil, and to anybody listening, that my child, currently buck naked, getting ready to go in the bathtub, is hiding behind my wife and then peering out from behind her and giggling at me. Again, totally naked, and now he's hiding behind a standing fan. So it's he just made podcasting a little bit more difficult. But that's an interesting thing you brought up. The idea, and I guess the rate-limiting step with this is probably, do people have time for that, right? Like if you have a draft at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday, can you set aside an hour and a half right beforehand to do a mock and then roll right into your draft? But and on top of that, how accurate is the mock with relation to your real draft? Do you feel like the competition is generally pretty equal there, or is the mock draft actually kind of make you let your guard down every once in a while?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer in terms of how real is this. I will say that my 2 drafts are totally different. So my 2 real drafts, they played out completely different, which is always going to be the case. But what I sometimes do is I worry too much about roster construction during the draft. And I think because my first draft didn't go as well as I wanted it to, I was just much more freed up by the time I did the second one. And I wasn't pressing as much or worried as much. And maybe things just came to me a little bit better. I don't know how it plays out. I will say the mock drafts, though, I don't know if you need an hour and a half. I've already done a couple, thanks to the encouragement of Adrian Benjamins, and they've gone very quickly. And I know that's obviously not going to be realistic in terms of the players you get. I mean, my team is ridiculous, and I was just like looking at my first mock draft team, and like almost thought about printing it out and putting it somewhere in my apartment. But anyway, what I was going to say is that
I believe Neil, did you watch the league when that show was on FX?
No. I had this like I did not watch it. I thought I was too good for it.
Yeah, it's pretty dumb. I thought it was fairly hilarious because I'm kind of dumb. But they did have a term, and I don't even know if I might need to censor this after the fact, but they called it roster baiting, which is effectively, I think, what was going on with you in that mock draft, right?
Oh God, that's hilarious. That's exactly what was going on. I mean, I was trying to find a way to like send it out to everyone. Like, look at this.
Like what I've done. I just picked on these 11 numbskulls that have no idea what they're doing. So that's what I fear actually with mock drafts. And I feel like I said this on a pod with Adrian. I can't remember if you and I talked about this as well. I don't do almost any mock drafts. We've talked about that. And one of the reasons is that I often feel like it gives me almost like a false confidence that, oh, well, I'm going to get all of these guys. And then I get into a draft with people who give a crap where there's a few $100s of their money on the line. And suddenly I'm not getting any of my guys where I want. So I don't know. I don't know what the perfect middle ground is. I guess Adrian's method is good too. You just have to be really diligent and you have to do mocks all the time to see where guys' average draft position is moving to. Otherwise, you're going to get fooled on draft night.
Yeah, that's a good point with the average draft position because you want current draft position. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm doing it more for just like going through the process. And what happens because for me, what happens when I usually mess up in a draft is because someone gets picked that I'm thinking I might get, or someone's out there who I don't expect to be out there. And then it kind of changed my mindset on how I'm approaching the draft. And if that can happen in a mock draft, and I do want to bring up one point. It was only like 15 minutes when I did it recently, and I think people just go by faster, which obviously means they're not taking it seriously. But I do think for me it helps at least get over that sort of like discomfort when things are kind of stirred up and I'm not expecting who to take or what to take. And
what you really need, Neil, is a real draft right before your big money draft, whatever that might be. Like whatever your most important league is. Get like a really small money league draft right in front of it where people care enough that they'll be paying attention, but not so much that it'll take 3 hours. If you could somehow schedule that, that would just be the pot at the end of the rainbow, I think. But that's hard though. Still, I will say you're 100% right. My second drafts, even when they're 2 or 3 or 7 days later, they almost always go better than my first because that's the real draft is when the adrenaline kicks in. That's when you have to deal with those moments where you really have 90 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever it is, and you have to make those decisions, and money's actually on the line. When you're in a mock draft, if you biff one of those picks, you're just like, all right, whatever, move on to the next one. In a real draft, if you make a bad pick, that thing eats at you for the next 3 rounds. You gotta get your head in the right space. So, yeah, I agree with you, man. If you can get a real draft before another real draft, you dominate the second one almost every time.
Yeah, I noticed that when I started playing fantasy football first years ago. So, yeah, I'm curious to try this out. This came to me thinking about doing mocks before my real draft this year. So we'll see. I'll let you know how it plays out. I have a feeling I'm going to be in a lot of leagues this year, so I'll have a lot of practice.
How many leagues do you think you're going to be in? This is another point of, not contention, because that's not the right word. We're not like getting angry about it at Hoop Ball, but I know a lot of us here are in a sort of wildly disparate number of leagues. I'm in very few leagues. We've talked about this before, just as a fantasy basketball player, I am pretty conservative. I've become a little bit more riverboat gamblery since I joined Hoop Ball. I think that's the influence of our benevolent overlord, Mr. Aaron Brewski, who's an absolute gambler. So I started with 1. I moved to 2. When I felt like I had basically conquered 2 and was winning or in the money every year in both leagues, then I added a 3rd. And now I'm in the money in all those, and I'm looking to try to make it a 4th. But I don't do that like 7 or 8 league thing. I know that Brew does more of a volume league approach, where he's like, look, I trust in my ability to draft so well that I'm going to join 25 leagues, and I'm pretty confident that I'm going to win at least half of those things.
Yeah, I could never manage that many leagues. I did 3 last year, and that was the most I ever did in one season, and that was challenging. More for just the daily waiver wire action or whenever the waiver wire action was more than the draft portion. Or, I don't really worry about like having one guy on one team and different guy on a different team and kind of rooting against one guy one week, or, having that sort of conflict comes up. That doesn't really bother me. What bothers me more is trying to stay on top of things. And I'm just incredibly busy right now with work. So it's hard for me. It's hard for me to just like stay on top of all that. I think this year though, I might just go nuts, because I think once I hit like 3 or 4 tipping point, it may not matter anymore. And I might be at least able to learn something from trying so many different types of leagues. Like last year was the first time I tried head to head, and it was a real big eye opener on how it played out. I learned a lot like through the season. So I might just try several different types of formats and see where it goes. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you today about.
I just I hate losing so much. I can't just add 3 or 4 more leagues on a whim. I can't do it because I know I'm not going to be able to give it the time it deserves. But I do appreciate that, someone like Brew, who he tends to join mostly weekly format leagues, which obviously does limit the amount of day-to-day stuff you have to worry about. That helps if you have a ton of leagues going. Most of mine are daily moves. Some of them are straight up stupid with the number of things you have to worry about on a day-to-day. And I don't feel like I don't want to add another league until I'm certain that I can give it the attention it deserves. I want to make sure that I'm going to win that thing. I'm just, I don't know. I'm nuts. I'm aware of that. Okay, so you were talking about types of leagues a minute ago, right? You just joined your first head-to-head this last year. Is that the one that you won?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's embarrassing. The rest of you folks in that listener league with Neil, you need to beat him this year. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, definitely a false sense of confidence now going into the listener leagues, thinking this is going to be a piece of cake. Well, I'll probably end up last. But anyway, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the fact that, because in rotisserie, I felt like I could never punt a category. I tried that one year. I've been playing fantasy basketball a half dozen years now, and it just there was no chance I could finish first. I could finish maybe third punting a category, but no way at first. It was just too competitive. In the head-to-head, in my situation, I know we've talked about this before, you don't like to punt any category. Was very comfortable punting free throws once my draft kind of went that direction.
So wait, go ahead. Elaborate on that a little bit if you could. So you didn't start the draft knowing you were going to punt the category? It fell that way? That sounds like a difficult way to draft.
Yes, it was very difficult. But LeBron fell to me towards the end of the first round. And as you know, he had one of his best seasons ever, fantasy-wise. So
yeah, that worked out okay
very
for
fortunate
you.
there. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I said that worked out okay for you.
Yeah, no, that worked out really well. Almost everyone kind of hit for me. So that's one of the reasons why I had a good streak last year. But at that point, I've had LeBron in the past. LeBron, is a high-volume free throw shooter. And last year he had a very good free throw percentage year. But I thought at that point when I drafted him, my free throw may not be great. So I was like, let me just punt free throws. And I was able to get some big men that I normally avoid that end up having terrible free throw percentage. Like at one point I traded for Dwight Howard. So that's where I was in the free throw line. And it just worked out. I was able to do so many other categories so well. It helped that I got guys that produced in every area. So if and when I do a head-to-head again this year, I think I'm going to try punting deliberately and see how it goes, unless my first 2 picks just kind of fall to guys that don't kill me in a category. So
yeah, I mean, if you're punting,
that's my thought right now. Go ahead.
Is there an advantage, do you find? Because yeah, it's true, by the way, what you say. I almost never punt a category. I did end up punting points one year, but that was by about the midway portion of the season where I just, I was like second or third from the bottom, and I thought, I could trade away this one guy on my team that's racking up points, and it might cost me 2, but if I can gain 2 points in rebounds and a point in steals and a point in blocks, well, then the ROI on that is net +2 or +3 points in my roto league. But it wasn't my intention from the outset. I've never in my fantasy career, and I've been playing fantasy basketball since 2002 now, I've never punted going into a draft in 16 seasons of this nonsense. So I don't think I can offer good advice on that. But after doing it one time, Neil, do you feel like going into a draft punting, your strategy, it has to be so very different, right? It's not that you're necessarily grabbing the punt guys early. It's just that you're sort of taking them, I don't know, maybe a half round ahead of where they might fall. Kind of ensure that you get those guys, but you don't want to blow a pick early on a guy that's going to fall later, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just changes your rankings, right? Because you can put on that punt category and you kind of see where guys get value now. And so guys that, let's take someone like Andre Drummond last year, who I don't have stats in front of me, but he was someone I would totally avoid. And I think many people avoid him because of that fact, because of his free throw percentage. And he will fall like a round or two late now because of that, because of his deficiency of the free throw line. But if you're punting, his value is so much better across the other categories. So you're actually gaining, if that kind of makes sense, without having to do anything except wait for him to fall to you.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing there, by the way. He's number 22, even if you don't punt free throws. And if you do, he was number 9 this year on a per-game basis in 9-category format. He played 78 games as well, so I could flick it over to totals. Andre Drummond was number 5 in the league if you punted free throws by totals in a 9-category format. Top 5. He was ahead of James Harden in 9-cat in that format. He was ahead of Kevin Durant and Victor Oladipo and Westbrook and Jokic and guys like... I mean, this is like... Dwight Howard was number 15 by totals if you punted free throws. But there's no reason for you to take Dwight Howard at 15. I mean, he's a guy you could get around 100 if you wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know where they fell in my draft, but I want to say at least Drummond didn't go before the 4th or 5th round. Same with Howard went late. So that's the thing. These guys are going to be so much more valuable in a team that you're punting than a team that you're not punting.
So how do you find the right draft position for a guy like that? I've been in drafts where I've seen other people trying to punt, and they usually screw it up by going and grabbing Dwight Howard in like the 5th round when clearly they could have waited longer than that. I mean, they could have gotten somebody in the 5th round like Rob Covington, who's not necessarily a punt free throw guy, but a really good fantasy player, right? I mean, you get the guys that you're in competition with other teams before you go get the punt guys. I feel like that's the big issue with a draft punt, is that people are like, okay, well, I'm punting this, so I'm targeting these 6 guys, and I'm going to take them with my first 6 picks, even though, you could go get a guy like Rudy Gobert, who other people are taking, even though he's not a great foul shooter. He's still going to be inside top 30, probably higher, on a per-game basis. He was top 30 on a totals basis this year. I guess I don't have the perfect advice for someone trying to balance those two factors, but there's got to be a way to really know where these guys are going, and that, of course, would be current draft position, right? As long as you take a guy like Dwight Howard, and he's the example I keep using because no one in their right mind would ever draft him if they weren't punting free throws. What if somebody else, and this is another thing that creeps into my brain halfway through this sentence, Neil, what if you find yourself in a league where 2 people are punting free throws? That's a really hard draft to orchestrate.
Yeah, that one might be very difficult. I may have just lucked into a draft where no one else wanted to do it. So I would not reach for any of these guys. What I would do is no longer have them on my do not draft list. I tend to, for my rotisserie league, I'm not going to have anyone on there that's going to kill me in any category. But then once I go into this head-to-head format, I will allow myself, if the situation arises that it seems like my team is not a very good free throw team, take a guy at a reasonable position once they fall there. But yeah, I'm not going to reach for anyone.
Sorry to jump in here. One of the other things that's worth mentioning in kind of the punt strategy realm, and this is actually a method that I'm not completely against. I find drafting for punt is very difficult and sort of leads you down a weird path. I can totally get behind the idea of drafting a team, seeing if you have a particular category that's just so brutal that there's kind of no reason to really make a push in it, as was the case for me in points a couple seasons back. I mentioned earlier on the pod where I was able to just call it. Dan's points, time of death, January 14th or whatever it was. And I took the guys on my team that were helping me in that category, but not much in others, and I rotated. I turned those points into other numbers, which to me feels like a really nice way to do it, because if you're punting, you really don't have much of an opportunity to trade partway through the year. Nobody else is going to want those guys on your team. You're in it, man, and there's no escape. If you don't plan on punting, if you just end up with a category that's not that great, you could trade a guy like Andre Drummond, who obviously was a punt guy. What if you drafted, he's not a great example because he ended up having a really good season anyway, but a guy like a Dwight Howard could be had for a pretty reasonable price partway through the year if you decided you wanted to punt partway along. Or, what if you have a 4th round pick that ended up being Chris Middleton one of these seasons? You're like, you know what? I don't really need his scoring and steals. I'm in really bad shape in those two categories, and there's no coming back. So I'm going to trade Chris Middleton, and I'm going to get 2 punt guys for him. I just feel like there's, from a value standpoint, you try to find the best player available, and if your team just ends up being awful at a category, well, you can kind of pivot away from that part way and turn those value guys on your team into something for someone else. To me, it's just kind of an asset thing, and that's why I struggle to go that direction. I kind of feel like it hamstrings you a little.
Yeah, I'll see how it plays out this year. Fortunately, it worked out fine for me last year. I do think, you mentioned if you have a guy on your team that you do want to trade who's a punt player and no one else may value them that well. And that is definitely true, but the converse is also true too. Like you said, you can get guys who players are really just other players just want to get rid of them because they're such a drag on a category that they're trying to fight for. And so maybe you can get them for a better price than normal. I like your strategy, and I think that's kind of how my team played out last year. I wasn't thinking about going into it, and I didn't. I wasn't thinking, okay, I'm going to reach for this guy, that guys that are normally that I'm going to avoid. But it just worked out that way. So glad it did. Do you want to talk about some of these other categories?
Yeah, let's talk about some other stuff. What else you got on the docket?
Let's talk about shallow versus deep league. So my thoughts are, I'm avoiding anything that's shallow because I think there's just way too much variance and luck involved with leagues like 10 or less. So I would never do a league that's that small anymore. 12 I'll start with, and then I'll even go up to 14 and 16. I think anyone who's listening on this podcast should probably be in deeper leagues because your knowledge is so much more than the average person. So, and with an 8-team league, a 10-team league, an injury here, an injury there, you can really get killed because every team's going to be stacked. I know it's not very deep analysis.
No, so do you think then, for those of us that are diehards like you, me, the rest of the hoop ball contingent here listening to the podcast, do you think that means it's then potentially easier for us to win bigger leagues because of our breadth of knowledge?
I think it's easier if it's against the average player, yes.
As opposed to like, okay, let's eliminate 14 of us here at Hoop Ball all playing in the same league. If it's like a 14-team league with some friends, some coworkers, some friends of friends, a couple of randos from Twitter, that kind of thing. Let's take a normal cross-section, because I think I'm getting what you're saying here. Because you're eliminating the luck factor as much as you can, as luck goes down, skill and knowledge becomes more important. And for those of us that feel like we have an edge in those departments, you can sort of better apply that. Your odds of winning become better.
Yeah, and definitely the later picks become more valuable, and the average player, I think, drops off after a certain number of ranked players. And secondly, the whole waiver wire pickup becomes much more strategic. You're picking up from a smaller pool, and being able to find guys that can produce more quickly than others is so important in those deeper leagues.
So I've been in a couple of 10-team leagues in my fantasy career. I've been in a lot of different types of leagues over 16 seasons. And the way that it worked out okay was a deep bench and a higher games cap. So it was a 10-team league that kind of played more like a 12, 11, 12, 13 type size where there were 5 bench slots and 90 games per roster position. So you were using a decent chunk of your bench guys. It definitely played deeper. But I agree with you. You know, we see these rosters posted on Twitter, and Neil, this is going to be your first full year on this side of the the fantasy curtain. You'll get a ton of questions where people just show you a screenshot of their team, and they're kind of fun. You get to look to see how everybody's builds are, but a lot of times they have these teams who are like, you can't possibly have all of those guys on the same team and still be coming to me for advice. Like if you have this team that I'm seeing in this picture before me, no one should be close to you, and then you find out it's like an 8-team league. Guys, I'm telling you right now, there just really isn't anything we can tell you about an 8-team league other than one key piece of information. If you are in a shallow league, package as many of your guys as you can for first rounders. That is the only thing you should be doing, because the waiver wire is going to be stuffed to the hilt with top 75 guys. They're all interchangeable. You know, you could pick up Lauri Markkanen this year, and he ended up having the same value as Aaron Gordon on a per-game basis. So, like, take these guys that had hype attached to their names, take your 3rd and 4th round picks, and bundle them to try to get 2nd and 1st round picks, because if you're in a league that small, you're probably in a league where people don't understand the true value of a first rounder, and if you have 2 or 3 first rounders at the end of the year, no one's ever going to beat you. That's all you need to do in a shallow league. Otherwise, you're right. It's a lot of luck because everybody's going to have ridiculously good teams. It's just going to come down to who's hot on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, and then the injuries come into a big factor. So if he gets unlucky with an injury, you're obviously going to be very much at a disadvantage. Yeah, that's a great thing to do. I know you're a big fan of the 2-for-1 trade, where you trade 2 pretty good guys for one great one, because normally you can replace them. The guys at the top are just so much more valuable than what people realize.
So much more valuable. So much more value. I had a pretty good conversation with one of our longtime listeners on Twitter about a hypothetical trade that I created on a show last week or the week before, where I said, look, and I think I was talking about totals at this point, and 9-cat totals. I said, look, Anthony Davis was worth the number 2 player and the number 20 player. Basically together. Okay, no, that's not right. Number 2 player and the number 23 player last year, which, as it turned out, was Anthony Davis was number 1. Number 2 was Karl Anthony Towns, and number 23 was Jimmy Butler. And the discussion was, well, look, you know, I would always, me personally, that's a really tough trade to make, because if Jimmy Butler actually plays more than 59 games, he's obviously not the number 23 player. So maybe I should have gone on a per-game basis, in which case Anthony Davis in a hypothetical full season is worth the same as Steph Curry and Drew Holiday together last year. Maybe that's an easier comparison for people to swallow. The point is, or at least the discussion that we were having was, well, some people would rather have the 1 guy and some people would rather have the 2. I would almost always rather have the 1 guy, because I believe I can go out there and find someone who's a top 75 value on the waiver wire, and then you're coming out ahead because you've got that open roster slot to use. Some people would rather have the 2, and maybe that's a discussion about league depth as well. Or if you get into 14, 16, whatever team leagues, you can't really give away a second-round pick and expect to replace them with somebody good. That becomes a much taller order. But this all loops back around, Neil, to what you had said, which is that first-rounders, the difference between each spot there is so huge. People just don't realize how insanely valuable those guys are, and how Anthony Davis this last year was worth, Damian Lillard and Chris Paul put together. Like, that's a crazy thing to try to put in your head and fathom how he could be that important. And then we're talking about him being the same as, like, 2 later first rounders. There's no other round where you can create that from 2 other players in the same round. I'm not sure really what the point of all that was, what the overarching message there, other than, again, in shallow leagues, you want to get as many first-round guys as you possibly can, and as leagues get deeper, it's just going to be tougher and tougher to replace those other guys, which is hopefully where our knowledge base comes in. Did that make any sense? I feel like I talked in a circle.
No, that made perfect sense. I'll just give an example from my home league a few years ago. We drafted the person who went first ended up getting Kevin Durant, one. And then on the back end, he got James Harden. That was just when James Harden was still in OKC. And then he got traded to Houston right after our draft. So he had Harden and Kevin Durant, and he won the league by December in the rotisserie league. It just wasn't even close. So, yeah, if you can get 2 first-round players, if you can trade up. The only time I think you should maybe go 2 for 1 the other way is if your team is really injured early on. One of your players is going to be out for the season, and you just have no depth at all. And you can try to get 2 pretty good players for 1 very good one, and then or 3 pretty good players, and then you can try to at least have a fighting chance in your league instead of just feeling like it's over at the very beginning.
Yeah, you really need to be in a tight spot, I think, to try to multiply assets like that. But there are weird situations where it makes sense. Perhaps you don't believe in the asset that you're giving away the way that somebody else does, right? Like maybe there's a mismatch in valuation. That's where a trade like that might make sense to take away the 2 what you'd call lesser players. But generally with, top 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 type guys, you and whoever you're trading with are going to have pretty similar valuations on them, and that's going to make it oftentimes very difficult to make a trade like that. I've pulled off a lot of these 2 for 1 trades, and I know that people are like, I don't know how you do it. No one in my league ever makes trades like that. You got to give away a lot, man. I think that point gets lost on people. They're out there trying to package a 3rd and a 4th round pick and ask for a 1st. That's just not going to work. You're going to have to give away probably a 2nd rounder and maybe even a 3rd rounder with him if you're expecting to move up that 2nd rounder into a 1st round territory. I was able to, it took me like 3 trades to get there. I don't remember exactly how they all shook out. I think I traded, see if my memory is any good these days. Since college, my short-term memory is a whole heck of a lot better. I wonder why. I think I traded Drew Holiday and TJ Warren for Lou Williams and Brooke Lopez, which actually didn't turn out to be that great of a trade with as well as Drew Holiday ended up playing. But Lou Williams went on that obscene tear very shortly after I traded for him, which turned him into the hottest asset in the NBA. Then I packaged Lou Williams and Al Horford, and I think I turned those 2 guys into Damian Lillard, which at the end of a season, looking back, obvious steal on my part. But Lou Williams was right in the middle of a month where he was a top 10 guy at that point, and Horford was a top 45 guy. So I traded a top, what at that point in the season was like a top 20 Lou Williams and a top 45 Al Horford for a top 15 Damian Lillard, who obviously went on to be a top 10 guy. And then I packaged Damian Lillard and someone else, that one I can't remember, to get Karl Anthony Towns. So it took me 3 2 for 1 trades, basically, to get to where I wanted to get to. But eventually I got there. You have to be persistent. You have to make sure the trades are as close to fair as humanly possible. You're not going to fleece anybody in this day and age. It just doesn't happen anymore with the amount of information out there. And if I'm making 1 for 2 trades, that means my team is in a real tight spot. And that's not, I don't want to be in that boat. That sounds terrible to me.
Yeah, hopefully you don't have to be in that situation. I will say there's one reason why maybe this is so hard for some people to grasp, and I know as fantasy analysts maybe we don't make it easier, is that people sometimes fixate on the ordinal rankings, like 3 versus 10, and not thinking that's so far apart, or 10 versus 12 versus the actual value the person puts up. It gets very close as you get into like the 70s, 80s, 90s. Maybe at that point you can start to think a few ranks doesn't make a difference. But between like 2 and 8 is probably the same difference as between like 20 and 60. I don't know. I'm just going off the top of my head, but it's crazy as you go down that far. So, and then as we mentioned, guys are ranked a certain way. We're not really talking about their true value. The difference in the rankings is much bigger than their value in the top half versus the bottom half, if that makes sense. I know you know what I'm trying to say, but I don't think it was very clear.
I think we should do a show on trades at some point. Is where I think we're going with this.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll have to remind myself not to trade with you ever because I think I would probably lose every one of those.
Well, I've lost a couple of trades. I mean, I think honestly the Drew and TJ Warren for Lou Williams and Brooke Lopez, you could probably grade that out as a loss because Brooke he didn't really turn it around until like the last month and a half of the year. And at that point, most of us had moved on. So, if he had put up those types of numbers for the season, then perhaps it would have been a win for me. But that part of that weird circuitous route I took to getting another first rounder, I don't think that I actually won out on that trade. So you just kind of have to be willing to take some chances, keep moving guys. Seth Klein, who's been on this podcast a number of times, is obscene in his trading. I think he alone may have made 20 trades in a league that I was with him in, I should say. And it worked out in the end. It's like this weird... He traded so many times that all of us sort of forgot where he started, but then all of a sudden he had like 3 top 15 guys on his team, and we're looking at it like, well, where the hell did all those dudes come from? Just wheeling and dealing all the time. If you can sort of manage it, it tends to work out okay. But you got to be careful. You got to be diligent, and you have to be persistent because generally your first trade offer is not going to get accepted. And like I said a minute ago, I think we should spend a whole show on this at some point. Any other stuff on league types before we wrap up today's pod?
I think the last one I want to talk about, which was really helpful for me to learn last year, was the daily versus weekly changes and the games cap. That's something that I was new to, just how crazy that can be if you're not able to access a league site all the time at your office because they block a certain site. So anyway, I don't think I would do many daily change leagues anymore. It's just, especially if I'm in several leagues, it'll just be way too hard. I can't imagine, you talked about Aaron doing a couple dozen leagues, but also doing weekly change leagues. I think if I'm going to go the high league route, it's going to have to be with minimal effort in terms of the change lineups. Otherwise, it's just, I think those people who have more time and are in fewer leagues are just going to be able to dominate if they're able to stay on top of things day to day.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's why the league that I'm in, where I have the most money on it, I always vote for daily changes. Because if I'm going to put a ton of money on something, I want to have as much control over it as humanly possible. Whereas, if you're talking about like a $25 or $30 or a $50 league or something that's, and I don't want to, it's why I generally don't talk about actual monetary numbers on this, because $50 means a different thing to everybody that listens to a pod. So I don't want to alienate anyone. So like a $25 league, I think we can all agree having $25 on the line for 6 months is not much. That's a pretty small outlay for half a year of entertainment. A kind of a small money league like that, I think weekly is perfect. You don't have to invest a ton of your time. You set your weekly lineups. You make your changes where you can. You can't get guys in on a daily basis, but if you want to log in every day and you want to make moves, you can still do it. It just won't impact your team for a few days. Whereas for me, in the leagues where I have multiple hundreds of dollars on the line and, there's multiple thousands to be won, I want maximum, absolute maximum adjustment ability. I want to be able to move guys in and out every single day. I want to be able to move guys in and out a bunch of times every single day. That's where I'm going to get my edge on people. Because I'm watching this crap all day, every day, and I should stand to benefit from that. So I think it's a balancing act, right? Doesn't that what it come down to, really? As with all things, best in moderation.
Most things, I think. But if you're someone who's a fantasy nut who has the time to do it, definitely do the daily changes league and the unlimited cap and just go crazy because those.
Wait, I got to jump in. I hate unlimited cap. Because then you get roster churn, and that drives me crazy. Don't you think if you are someone who can have the time to do that, don't you think that's most advantageous? Yeah, it is, but like you get guys that are making 6-7 moves a day towards the end of the season, and they're just going, they're trying to get 10 players going every single day for the last month of the year, and that to me is that's not strategy. That's no longer knowledge. That's just how many times can I click, pick up, and drop? I think that there should be some measure of skill to who's on your team. So give me a games cap Maybe go a little higher than 82. So you got to use your bench a little bit, and maybe you'll have to make some moves at the end of the year to pick up some ground. But I don't like unlimited games played. I think that favors what I talked about, I think 2 days ago, which is kind of like cheesing in fantasy. To once again use a term from Street Fighter 2 Turbo. If anybody played that game in like 1994 or whatever it was. That one, it's just sportsmanship, I think, goes out the window when you get into the end of an unlimited game season. Have you been in that spot before? Because it gets ugly.
Yeah, I was last year for the first time in a new league. I tried just to see what it was like, and I was not able to keep up with the changes in time. I was just too busy. And so, yes, people who had the time to do it were at a huge advantage. And you're right, it's less about basketball knowledge and more just about availability of time. So
yeah, that's crummy. Because if you have time, that's great, and you should use it to strategically build a very good basketball team, fantasy basketball team. But it shouldn't just be, I'm going to drop my third-round pick today, and I'm going to pick up somebody that's been on the waiver wire the entire season because he's playing 2 times in the next 2 days, and my guy doesn't, because at this point in the year, half the teams have given up, and all I got to do is pass this one team in rebounds, so blah, blah, blah. But I do love, if I got a ton of money on a thing, I can't wait 7 days between doing things to my lineup. That would drive me completely insane. However, that being said, Neil, all of our listener leagues are weekly leagues. So I went against what my own preferences are. I think people should know this when I set these things up, because I think weekly makes more sense when we have a lot of these things going. It limits, as I just mentioned ago, roster churn. It allows people to be very strategic in who they're starting on a week-to-week basis, and it allows you to have a number of teams. It's a way to add teams to your already existing fantasy arsenal. Like, Neil, you said you're going to go from like 3 or 4 teams to probably a dozen in 1 year. And the only way to make that happen is with weekly leagues. So that's where we're at with the weekly stuff, with the listener leagues. I will be quietly monitoring them because, like I've said before, I don't want to add leagues until I feel comfortable with where I'm at. But if you're joining them, they will all be weekly leagues. And Neil, I feel like this is a good time we should tell people how they can join them again. You want to do the reboot on that since I took the first one?
yeah, there's a few different ways you can join the leagues. One is follow Dan and I on Twitter. He's at Dan Besbris. I'm at Ball with Neil and EIL. Tweet at us after you follow us and let us know which league you'd like to be in. We have 4 types, basically. Rotisserie or head-to-head, and then cash or free. The cash is $50 buy-in. And also the leagues are either 12-team or 14-team deep. I believe you're keeping it 12-team for the head-to-head and 14 for the rotisserie. Is that correct?
We're trying to go 12 on both, but again, with Roto, there's a little bit of wiggle room since you don't need an even number of teams. So, if there's an 11 or 13 or 14 or whatever, then that'll be okay. But I still feel, I don't know, but we're already like more than halfway to where we were last year in these things, which makes me think we're not going to have any trouble filling leagues up. So there might be a lot of them. Neil, you have a lovely, lush, thick, vibrant head of hair right now. And you didn't know where I was going with that, but I have a weird feeling that it's going to be gone by like November 2nd.
It's going to be more gray. Let's just say that. I will say, the other way to join the league is to go to the Hoopball forums, and under the forum titled, you started, I forget the title of it. Is it just
I think it's just Hoopball Leagues, yeah.
Yeah, Hoopball Leagues. There's already almost, I think, 20 entries at this point. Go ahead and just add your name at the end and which league you want to be in, and email address, por favor. Or you could just, if you don't want to do your email directly there, you can just let me know on Twitter, and then I can do it more discreetly. And there was a third way. I forget. Facebook, is that correct?
Yeah, Facebook. We had one fella that reached out on Facebook, and then he ultimately figured out that he saw it on Twitter, so he did it there anyway. But if you're on Facebook, and I know that, I've handled marketing for a minor league baseball team, so I know that Twitter is going to be the one that makes the most sense. Facebook tends to be more of local events type of deal. We're obviously an international thing, fantasy basketball. But should you find yourself on Facebook, if you're not big into Twitter, we are at Hoopball Hoops. on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/hoopballhoops, and that's where you can check that bad boy out. Well done, my good man, Neil. I'm sure you're thrilled that your evenings for the next month and a half are going to be jam-packed with making sure people are in the right listener leagues. But I'm going to tell you right now, they all thank you for it. The great Neil Rochlani, thank you again, my man. You and Adrian, since I'm not going to talk to him on a pod this week, I really do appreciate what you guys did for me these last few days.
You're my pleasure. I think I can speak for Adrian when he says he was happy to do it.
He is Neil. I am Dan. Have a wonderful Thursday, everybody. Neil and Adrian will pick up where they left off with a breakdown of divisions. Where are you guys, by the way? What division's coming next? Do we know?
I think we've done 2 in the East. So we've done the Atlantic and the Southeast. So I think we'll probably go whatever is next in the East. Is it Central? Yeah.
I think that would be Central coming next in the East. So that's what you got coming up on tomorrow's pod. Neil, you're a goof. At the Ball with Neil on Twitter, at Dan Besbris, at Hoopball Fantasy. We'll see you in the leagues, everybody. So long.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.